everybody. Welcome to Inside, Outside, Inside. We're very glad to have you here with us for tonight's virtual tour. And so my name is Melanie, and I run IOI with Zoe. Zoe, can you give a little wave in the Zoom? Hey, thanks, boo. And so this is a project that we've been running together since quarantine, and we're really happy to have you on tonight. And tonight, I'm coming to you from my apartment here in Brooklyn, which is on occupied Lenape land, and specifically the ancestral and unceded home of the Munsee people. And tonight, as we think about land and space on our walking tours, I just really want to acknowledge that the development of, the neighborhood that I'm living in was really fueled by, a mindset of profits at any cost, including, obviously genocide and then the ongoing displacement of the people of the larger Lenape Nation and other indigenous communities. And so to me tonight, as we're gathering, I think you can see that legacy as we think about spaces that folks can and can't access. And so we're really excited to, again, challenge some of these ideas with you all and that you're here with us. So with that said, let me just give you a little idea about what Inside, Outside, Inside is. And thank you, Zoe, for being so good with the transition of slides. So yeah, Inside, Outside, Inside is a virtual tour powered by the magic of screen sharing. So each month, we bring together a new group of tour guides and give them a prompt. And then we meet on Zoom like we are right now, where our guides will screen share a 5 to 8 minute virtual tour responding to that prompt. And so this month, we're actually excited to have our first partner in this project. We're working with the Goethe-Institut of New York as a part of their summer series on digital third spaces. So Catherine with the Goethe-Institut, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourselves and telling folks, one, how my German pronunciation was just then, and two, a little bit more about your project.
Hi, thanks, Melanie. It was perfect, so good job. Ausgezeichnet. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Catherine Meller, she, her, and I'm the Cultural Program Coordinator at the Goethe-Institut New York. This event is part of our series, Apotheca, a digital third place. This series combines German approaches to holistic wellness and balance with American theories of self-care and wellness outside of capitalism. With the series, we're interrogating the compulsion to work while creating a communal, non-commercial digital space that allows for relaxation and pleasure, along with learning and exchange. I'm going to put a link with more info into the chat, and then I'll pass it back to Melanie. Thanks again, Melanie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, it's been great working with you on this. We're excited to be a part of this really great series. And we'll talk a little bit more later on in the tour about some of the great events they have coming up later this week. But with no further ado, we'd love to start getting us to the tour. So, this month we have 3 really great guides that I'm excited to have y'all meet. So we have Christina Seo, Luz Cruz, and Annie Ko. Hi, y'all. And so they'll be taking us to places that, currently we think of as, private spaces, and imagine, what they could be if they literally weren't gatekept by the ruling class. So again, Catherine will drop their bios into the chat so you can get to know more about their amazing work. But now, first I want to just give some quick guidelines before the tour gets started. So if you haven't noticed, this is a very chat positive space, as we like to call it. So feel free to use that chat. If there's something that resonates with you during the chat, feel free to, yes, do whatever makes sense to you. If there's, a link you want to share, please feel free to drop it in. We really, again, we miss being able to be with you all and to be able to interact with strangers and all those great things that we used to be able to do before our government proved to be inept for dealing with this pandemic. So again, we hope that y'all are able to get to know one another and feel free to use the chat to do so. That being said, any uncool or jerk-like behavior, we won't tolerate it, so you'll be kicked out if you plan on doing that, so please don't. Seems like there's better things to do with your time, but that's just me. As our tour guides are going tonight, if you get an idea about a place that you would love to turn into a truly public space, feel free to message either Zoe or myself and say, hey, I would actually like to screen share as well. And if we have time at the end, we'll move it over to screen share. And then again, using that chat, feel free to send questions in. Our host may answer them in real time, or we also have some time at the end for Q&A. So we're excited to hear what they're gonna say. And so now that we've given you the overview and the run of show for tonight, I am beyond thrilled to throw it over to our first tour guide. She is a Chicago-based writer and artist, like truly one of my most dear and wonderful friends on planet Earth. So I couldn't be more excited to move things over to Christina Seo. So Seo, over to you to take us on our first tour tonight.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Seo. I am calling in from Chicago, Illinois, where I work with bees and also try to promote closed loop cycles with other manufacturing companies in the South Side. So let's get this started. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, so what I have on right now is an Alexander veil, which is very key for safety. And also, I just wanted to get in the spirit of this. So thank you so much for joining, everybody. All right, so to start, I've got here, let's just go downtown. Oh, wait, let's see, this bar. There we go. So basically the section of the Loop, which is a hub of industry in Chicago, has two really famous parks, Maggie Daly Park and Millennium Park. Millennium Park is known for having Cloud Gate, which is Anish Kapoor's wonderful piece that I find very cold and uninviting. But more importantly, Maggie Daly Park here, you know, this is a beautiful park, yes, but it requires quite a lot of investment to participate in this space. Just looking at some of the rules and regulations, you know, no open fires. Why? I mean, if you're having a proper park, you should have access to, like, you know, having a grill, having it be really a space that supports the community. And it just feels so cold. No bikes, no dogs. Who is this person? Who is this person that goes to a park without a dog, without a bike, without, you know, an open fire? So what I imagine is just taking this beautiful park and, you know, taking something like the Cancer Survivors Garden, which takes, if you would like to rent it for a 2-hour minimum, $550 or $350 to rent out per hour. So why not take this beautiful space and, like the place that I apprenticed with, Bike-A-Bee, not only allow for bikes, but allow for the beauty of nature to, like, actually take over, you know? So having this Cancer Survivors Garden, you know, be more a space for community and maybe allowing people to barbecue anywhere in the park. Also, talking about Anish Kapoor, the type of artwork that they've, you know, dotted here and there in the park, let's just see how stressful his website is. This is cold. I'm stressed. It just seems so, I don't know, y'all. This is just not my vibe right now. But yeah, so imagining this place that requires you to give, you know, it requires the person participating in this space to pay quite a lot to actually find comfort in this place. So, you know, Park Grill is one of the restaurants that's available. Look at these prices, folks. A pot of gold, pot of nothing, okay? Pot of nothing for me, okay? I'm not going to participate. I will bring my own sandwich in order to enjoy something that should be a public space, you know? I just feel like there are a lot more uses for something that should be, you know, community-based than what they have here. And I imagine that we could not only take over with an infrastructure like Jana Kinsman and the educational director, Brittany Buckles of Bike-A-Bee, which stewards hives and beekeeping and apiaries all throughout the city by bike. You know, it's possible. It would be a beautiful thing. And maybe you could throw in like a garden and, you know, have people actually use this space for anything other than let's just read this. Let's just read this a little bit. $1,200 to rent a lawn. What? That's like, with a minimum 4-hour rental? There's a minimum 4-hour rental. I don't know who this person is who's able to participate in this garden or in these parks, but yeah, that's just it's just seemingly wrong. You know, again, gorgeous, but let's see, even Buckingham Fountain. My friend tried to dip her toes into Buckingham Fountain, which is gorgeous, but was very quickly arrested. You know, maybe make this like a beautiful pool. I would love, oh my gosh, I would love to be in a pool here, because the lakefront is also inaccessible. There's just, I mean, there's a lot of geese, but there's no shoreline, as you can see, just dead, no space for people. Scoops ice cream, I don't want to know the prices. Alrighty, so let me hop off screen sharing and let's see, bring it on back to our beautiful host, Melanie.
Thank you, Seo. First of all, thank you for committing to wearing your full beekeeping garb while in this presentation. I couldn't have asked for a better uniform for tonight's call, so thank you for that. Could you tell us a little bit like about what, like if we wanted to set up some sort of like bee sanctuary in a space like this, like what do you have to do? Like what kind of infrastructure would you need? Like how do I get my honeycombs going?
Truly, all bees need are access to pollination, and or like, you know, pollinators, native pollinators tend to go for like a lot of the flowering trees that thankfully the urban planners in Chicago have thought of. So a lot of dogwood, a lot of you know, I think they're called horse chestnut trees, but they're gigantic, and they offer, because bees can actually travel about 3 miles from their hive, so they can access everywhere in the city. You know, they need water, clean water. Bees tend to drink a lot of water to regulate the humidity and temperature of their bodies, and also to promote like less heat within a hive. But basically all they need is just a little plot of a land for a humble you know, hive to survive. That's really all they need. Very, very resilient if they have the you know, stewardship and all that.
Yes, amazing. Well, thank you for that. And I love the idea of turning Maggie Daly Park and all of its spaces that require you to pay just to sit in the park with your friends. I'm very happy to turn that over to the bees, who can actually produce, you know, honey for the people. We can have honey samples out in front of the bean. Like, you know, I feel like I'm here for all of that. So again, thank you, Seo, for the time today. And oh, one quick other thing. I don't know if you had, just when we were talking earlier tonight, if you wanted to share a little bit about your mobile project that you're working on. I feel like it's going to pair quite nicely with our next tour.
Yeah, so as I've kind of, I guess I can share my screen again. Mm-hmm. But basically my current project at the moment has been focused on utilizing, you know, my job requires to find profit for waste being produced by manufacturing companies like breweries and stuff. So privately, my hobby is trying to create art out of waste. So based on these sketches of the old school Chicago PD car and the current horrifying SUVs that you've probably seen in New York, Mel, you know, I want to be resilient with waste. You know, this is like a PBR box, and I think there's like a Sensodyne toothpaste box in there somewhere. But yeah, I've been trying to, these will then get, you know, paper mached with just plain water and flour and newspaper bits that I find on the street, and painted over and hopefully used to decorate people's homes and like repurpose waste.
Yes, I love that. I couldn't not bring up the fact that you're burning cup car mobiles. And again, I feel like it fits quite nicely with our next tour guide. So if you have any questions about the mobiles that Seo is working on, feel free to send us a message. But otherwise, thank you so much, Seo, for your being our first tour guide tonight. And now I'm gonna hand it over to Luz. Hey, Luz.
Hey, everyone. So I will start screen sharing. I am taking everyone to Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, okay. So I'm gonna take us down Lake Street, which Lake Street was kind of where the concentration of the uprisings happened in South Minneapolis. I can zoom out a little bit. So this is Minneapolis, the city as a whole, and then this southern area is where the uprisings happened. And so our first stop is this really empty lot on Lake Street. And is that, hold on. No, I'm sorry, y'all.
It's a good impromptu tour of around Minneapolis, which I haven't seen before, so I'm glad we're getting some of this now.
Here we go. Okay. So here we are on Lake Street. There's this empty lot. And honestly, I think one of the biggest points about Minneapolis is that mutual aid and the reappropriation of private property for public use has been a thing here for a very long time. And I think the size of the city is what makes it possible to be a thing. And so here is an empty lot that that is actually now, I didn't take photos of it, but now is actually a public community garden. And so groups of people just came and took it over and threw down mulch and dirt and built benches and a greenhouse. And there's food growing here for people. And this neighborhood, the population is largely Black, Indigenous people of color. Minnesota as a whole has Minneapolis as a whole has a high population of Indigenous people. The second place that I will take folks to is this beautiful Sheraton Hotel, which, so here's the Sheraton, which as you can see is marked on the map as closed. So during the uprisings, the managers of this facility, this hotel, evacuated it. And for about a month or so, with permission of the managers, it was used as a homeless shelter. And so a lot of the homeless population, and there is a large homeless population in Minneapolis, were housed here, and there were social workers that were volunteering, and individuals were trained in harm reduction, and it was a huge community space that also was in memory of George Floyd, who was a shelter worker. There's this Family Dollar. All these places on this map are marked as temporarily closed. So this Family Dollar, this is the photo that's on Google Maps, right? So I was there today, and this is the Family Dollar. So now there's just this burnt out shell of a building sitting here in this huge parking lot, and there's still people that are houseless because they're no longer, they got evicted from the Sheraton Hotel. And at the very least here, you could set up some sort of tent city, because individuals were also camping out at neighboring parks and were recently, as of last week, evicted from these parks by police officers. And so there's all these spaces in this area that are could absolutely be repurposed for so many other things. So I'm going to take us to the 3rd precinct, which conveniently enough, so we'll go into Street View here of the 3rd precinct. So this is the 3rd precinct. At least this is how it looks on Google Street View. Conveniently enough, and this intersection was where, the 3rd precinct got taken. It was looted and set on fire. Conveniently enough, I didn't have to take photos because someone added photos of what the precinct currently looks like today. So this intersection as a whole, so the city council met a week ago, 2 weeks ago. It will take $10 million to rebuild this. $10 million to rebuild this, and there's still, 45% of the homeless population is indigenous and native to the lands, the Anishinaabe. The majority of homeless people here are Black, indigenous people of color. And those $10 million could go towards maybe rebuilding this to be an actual homeless shelter, because there's such a lack of spaces in homeless shelters. And just this intersection as a whole, just to bring us back, this intersection as a whole, I could foresee there being a multitude of homeless shelters. So this liquor store no longer exists. Right here on the corner, it no longer exists. It's completely burnt down. There is a hole in the ground. This is the liquor store. This is the AutoZone that's right across the street from that. There are, the $10 million could be taken to rebuild the 3 corners at this intersection and build housing for the homeless population in Minneapolis, which is huge. So yeah, that's my tour.
Thank you so much, Luz. Again, that was like the first tour that, or like the first time I've like spent some significant time in Minneapolis is this tour. So thank you for giving us a up-to-date version, or at least as much as Google Maps will allow us to, of what's happening there. And yeah, how we can imagine, a city like Minneapolis, like, to actually, again, putting those resources towards things that are actually needed, and that, again, can house people and make sure that they have places to go. Did you want to talk at all about, I know we put it into the chat about what some of the fundraising that you've been doing out in Minneapolis, but just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about what y'all are working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a result of the uprisings, the largest supermarket that most individuals in the South Minneapolis neighborhood shopped at was burnt down, was looted, along with the Target, which left the community without places to do their food shopping, and that coupled with, you know, the current pandemic and lack of employment for these individuals, also meant that they didn't have the they don't have the monetary resources to seek food or non-consumables elsewhere, and also the majority of the South Minneapolis population, especially the Black, Indigenous, POC population, don't own vehicles. And so it's not easy for them to get around to purchase the things that they need. And so the Free Store was developed through that. And we've partnered with Black, Indigenous farmers, as well as other nonprofits to bring supplies to this cooperative bike shop. And we set up 3 days a week. And we give away free food and non-consumables, the majority of which are diapers and baby formula. I had no idea how expensive diapers were before this because I don't have children, but they're incredibly expensive. But we're serving multi-generational households. A lot of them are Latinx immigrants and also Somalian refugees who have come to Minneapolis. And so, yeah, we serve about 200 people 3 days a week. And so, yeah, so you can donate through our website, Cuir Kitchen Brigade, and all of the proceeds will go to that. I'm also personally fundraising for a vehicle in order to transport a lot of the donations and food supply that we get to the spot where we store them. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, well, first of all, thank you so much for the work that you and everyone that you're working with are doing. And again, we put some links to it in the chat, so feel free to scroll and catch those links. And please, if you're able to, definitely donate. And we'll be sending out more information about all the work that Luz is doing in collaboration with a lot of other folks. So keep an eye for that after the event. So thank you so much for our tour of Minneapolis, and thank you for the work that you're doing out there. And then now I want to kick it over to tonight's final tour guide. So we have Professor Annie Ko, who's joining us. Hey, Annie.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me all right? I'm using the phone audio. All right, awesome.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So there's definitely a through line, I think, through all three tours today, which is really thinking about, how do we really define public, and what does that really look like? And so, oftentimes one way that we do that in I teach urban planning is by thinking about, oh, is this a good public space? Right? Like, is this an attractive public space? And is this an appealing public space? Would I want to be here? So, in the chat, like, what kind of public space is this? Right? Like, what does this look like to you? What does that feel like to you? And then, same for this one, right? What kind of public space is this, right? Sort of, how do you react to it? What does that mean? How do you see it? How do you feel it? And I think, these are the things. It's a kind of a very tragic trick question in many ways, because these are public spaces that are, somewhat public, right? In the sense that this is a city park in Milwaukee that has a Starbucks coffee, so that's been privatized to a certain degree. And, this is a public park in Cleveland, that is open to the neighborhood. But these are also sites of murders. So in that Milwaukee park, in 2014, Dontre Hamilton was shot and killed due to cops being called on him because he was sleeping in that park, right? So how is that a public space if you're not allowed to sleep? And same thing, that Cleveland Park was the site where Tamir Rice, when he was 12 years old, and was playing, in the park with a toy gun, someone called the cops and said, hey, there's a kid with a gun, or not even a kid, I'm sorry, there's a man with a gun. because he's, 5'7" and, big for a 12-year-old. And, thinking about this is really a huge issue when it comes to public spaces, because just because we as a society, as a city, right, legally say it's public, and doesn't mean that it actually functions that way for people in real life, right? So, it's legally public, but it's de facto, private to many people who are considered to not belong. I think security guards, business improvement districts, private security, all these things sort of signal to a lot of, especially young men of color, Black men, Black youth, that they're not supposed to be there, right? So that's sort of part one. Part two is I wanted to think about how oftentimes we actually have to live our private lives in public spaces. So let me switch over to this. So I'm giving you, hopefully, a shot of Han River Park in Seoul, Korea, where I lived for a while. And, it looks chill and idyllic, and, it's like a sunny day and people are, hanging out in pop-up tents with their families. And, I think in this case, in the sort of picnic sense, we often embrace and encourage people to hang out in public spaces, that this is like a sign of convivial, sort of a good public space that people are here enjoying themselves. But then in other cases, we think about tents as intrusions into the public space, right? So I also lived in Honolulu, Hawaii for a long time. And, in Kaka'ako, which is where I did my dissertation research, there's been a long-standing sort of public debate over the right of houseless people to live in public space, right? And so there's been constant clearing, right, like sweeps, encampments in the name of public safety and public health, over and over again, right? Like many cities, Honolulu has created municipal ordinances that, criminalize the act of sitting on a sidewalk, that criminalize, having stuff in public space. So, oftentimes the idea of public space requires private space, right? We only can have a public space and belong to public space if we have private space in which to sleep, to, use the bathroom. And then I think, going back to Seo's comment about all these kind of restrictions on how we use space, this is a park, Old Stadium Park near where I lived in Honolulu, and that also, sort of because of where it was in the urban core, had a fair amount of houseless folks living here. And I don't know if you can see, but this sign and all, it has like the usual things that you're not supposed to have in parks, right? So like not prohibited, or prohibited was like alcoholic beverages, animals, camping, golfing. That's a little bit surprising. I did not know that that was an issue in little parks. But they've also added at the very top tents, and they've also added shopping carts and feeding birds, right? So thinking about like even just the act of sort of, the kind of wanting to engage with nature and the very basic, and yeah, for sure, it can be like a nuisance, right? If there's a zillion pigeons flying around, but just even sort of simple things of having stuff in space, of having an interaction with an animal is now outlawed. And then, of course, we think about public spaces, and this is the Flower District in Los Angeles, as also places of commerce, right? That this is a space that we can sort of with vending and, street food. It's a place that's leisurely, but it's also really super kind of class and racial, classed and racialized. So is this considered as that desirable way of using public space? And then, of course, there's Skid Row, right, which is right next to the, arts, the gallery district, and to, Little Tokyo, and to, the downtown LA 2040 plan. So they're in, the line of fire for this kind of huge discussion, this narrative of, oh, this is filthy, this is, horrible public health, like, we must get them off the street, this is unsightly. So these are the things that I think about when, we talk about public spaces, and how do we read them? Like, how do we react to them physically as people, like viscerally? And that, how do we sort of understand that there are spaces that kind of aren't categorizable exactly as definitely public space or definitely private space. And so the last thing, or actually two last things I wanted to end it with, is that a long time ago, I learned about the concept of an eruv, which is in order to observe the Sabbath for many Orthodox Jewish households, you can not do certain things out in the public. So it's the creation of sort of the extension symbolically of domestic space into public space. So you're able to go out the door and lock it, right? Just so you're able to, take a walk with your family, right? So then, is that something that we can do for, in other ways, right? Like not just from a Jewish tradition, but also thinking about, yeah, we should be able to do domestic private things in public space in ways that, aren't being policed, against people who are poor, against people who are houseless. And then of course, sort of going back to the kind of policing through line, which is that, when it comes to who's considered, to be allowed in public space, that's also a super fraught issue. And so one thing, and this is a study from last year, is that complaints about noise from the street and the sidewalk were the primary quality of life complaints made to the city. And in that case, it was primarily from areas that were quickly gentrifying and had a huge increase in white residents. So, thinking about how we change our understanding of what is good uses of public space, like who belongs, like which users and uses are permitted or are seen as legitimate. So, kind of a whirlwind tour of a zillion places, but really just hoping to kind of poke at our assumptions that we know what public space is, right? Like we see it and we know it, and thinking about what we want actually from public spaces, right? Is it too much to expect that everyone has a private space, right? And so therefore, then they can do certain things out of sight, as opposed to having only the public spaces, like the libraries, which I miss so much in the era of COVID, right? To be able to use the bathroom to charge your phone. So I'll stop there.
Amazing. Well, if we can give a quick round of applause to Annie and all of our hosts tonight. I know I have about a million questions right now for all of y'all, but I do really appreciate everybody taking the time. And yeah, it's Professor Ko for taking us to a whirlwind tour of ways we can be doing things a lot better, to say the least. So again, thank you. And Zoe, I just want to see if I should move it over to you and see if we have a question that anyone wants to ask tonight.
Yeah, we got questions. I guess sorry, my audio is weird. Sorry about that echo. I guess our first question is like, what, and this is open to all tour guides, like what should we do with Jeff Bezos's $165 million mansion in LA? Do any of the tour guides have any ideas?
Mansion, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, no worries. Yeah, well, we talked about Zuckerberg, and that means now we kind of have to talk about Jeff Bezos. But yeah, Jeff Bezos's $165 million mansion in LA. Or any mansions in general, yeah.
I mean, it really goes into how we have kind of made this fantasy and fairy tale about home ownership, and that it's only on these extreme edges where it's like this super luxe kind of obscene version of home that we realize like, oh wait, this is absurd. Like, how many people live in this house and how many rooms are there? So it feels like, the kind of, how much do we think Bezos and Zuckerberg like deserve? Did they earn all of the money that they currently have rattling around in their banking accounts, and it's no. And then thinking about how public, I think the idea of curb appeal is a really terrible, pernicious one. So, all the NIMBYs, right, not in my backyard, who fight against homeless shelters, right? So Luz is talking about, could we create more of these? Like that hotel that was taken over was awesome, right? But it's often neighbors who say, this is going to, reduce my property value, right? I'm against this because it's bad for my property value. So that's just my first reaction, is around kind of private property and how that plays out.
Totally. It makes me think also a lot about all those television shows that take us to really luxe houses, and the way it just sort of, I don't know, builds up that sort of myth. Luz, do you have anything that you want to say?
Yeah, I think my initial response is we should get people to squat it. But, and I think that all these problems are so interconnected, and that because of capitalism, our self-worth is defined by wealth. And so the bigger and more grandeur our house is, we're a better person, or we're somehow a superior human being. Even though it's complete false. And it's the myth of capitalism. And yeah, I think that I think a lot about the squatters movement in the 60s in New York City and the Lower East Side, where the NYPD had to bring in a tank to try and get these people out of these homes, and still were fairly unsuccessful. And some of those squats still exist till today, and they're owned by the people. Or I have friends that are squatting in Chicago right now, and providing housing for homeless people during COVID in Chicago. And so I just think about how do we just reclaim these spaces without any sort of without having to ask for permission. Is something I think about.
Totally. No, that was really cool to hear. And then another question we have is from Julia. And Lucy, I know you kind of answered this in the chat by sharing that link from 99% Invisible, but Julia asks, do you have any thoughts on specific architectural interventions, things that urban planners can work for that help combat the de facto privateness of public spaces? They say, obviously, the problems won't be totally solved until we make much bigger non-architectural changes like abolishing the police, but any thoughts on how we can work towards the world with spatial and architectural choices? And also, I'll reshare it here in the chat so people can really see the question as well.
I was thinking actually about I call it, was it the Bean? Is that the nickname for that statue or sculpture in Millennium Park? So, right, that doesn't seem like it's hostile in the sense that it's not coded as, it doesn't have spikes so you can't sit down. But in some other aspects, I think it's actually hostile because it is focused on kind of luring the tourist, right? It's this destination, it's the world-class park. If you want to just make me go off for 40 minutes, you can just say world-class park, and you can say activating underutilized space, and then I'll lose it, because that implies that the people who are currently there are not worth it, right? Or that the people who live in the neighborhood aren't valuable. And there's a great documentary from the 90s called Claiming Open Spaces. In a second, I'll go look for the link. But really thinking about what does it mean to create spaces that are for the people who live there, who maybe aren't the desirable out of town middle class tourist. So that's one thing that's not necessarily a specific design choice, but it's sort of a tourism, people want economic development, but when it comes to the point that we're designing everything around this imagined tourist vision, then that's a problem, right? so many of the letters to the editor in the Honolulu newspaper were like, what will the tourists think of the homeless people, right? Like, you know, we have to hide them because the tourists won't like them. He's like, yeah, but these are your neighbors who are living on the street or in the park. Like, why are we so worried about the imagined tourist as opposed to your actual neighbor who's right there? So that's kind of my big intervention is let's not get so worked up over like having that beautiful, like, you know, landscape design that's going to get this architecture, like, you know, best public space in the world, and sort of think more humbly.
Annie, I just wanted to also say that, like, yeah, the tourism aspect of the whole situation is infuriating because it's like people live here. And also the like hiding the problems, like for instance, the encampment at this park in Minneapolis called Potterhorn Park. A lot of the individuals that, and South Minneapolis is a very heavily gentrified neighborhood. A lot of the residents that had their houses like looking over the park were complaining about the sex trafficking and the drugs and all of these like social issues. And lots of people had to be like, these problems existed before. They're just on your doorstep now. And that's the only reason why you actually care about this thing. Is I think a lot of the ways in which like, actually if more of these encampments exist and people actually like got to see the like socioeconomic like issues that develop out of poverty and homelessness, maybe they would actually give more of a crap and want to do stuff about
it. Awesome. Zoe, I think we're about at time for questions. Anything else to add there?
No, I saw, Bob, your question about public. Well, there's actually more questions are really coming in. So do you want to just take two more?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So Bob asked, like in England and Wales, they have something called right of way. These are paths which the public have a legally protected right to pass and repass on foot or on otherwise across private areas. Is there anything like that in the US? And also no worries if I have no idea, but maybe one of our 3 tour guides does.
Yeah, Annie, do you have it?
I just put it in the chat, which is I only know this specific to public access to the shoreline. So several states, I think I know for sure Oregon, California, and Hawaii, you have, like the shoreline is all public, right? Up until I think either vegetation or the high tide mark, depending on where you are. And so even if you own all of that land between, you know, like whatever, you're right along the beachfront, you can't actually block off access to the beachfront. So the only way that people can get there is if they swim, surf, or boat. And so there's requirements to create those right-of-ways to get onto the beaches. And obviously people will like do their best to hide it or like create a lot of bushes so it exists, but it can't be seen. But I think, you know, I think sort of how do we require right-of-ways is a good question. And I think, you know, I only know of it when it comes to the shoreline.
Awesome, thank you. And with that, I know we are a little over time, but conversation was good, so we didn't want to end things, sorry. It was just great being with you all. So again, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Inside, Outside, Inside. Again, if we could get a little virtual round of applause for our wonderful tour guides tonight. We had Seo, we had Luz, we had Annie. Thank you to Catherine and the Goethe-Institut for their support for tonight's event. Definitely encourage you to check out their other programming they have coming up. On this Wednesday, they're going to have a really cool talk that I saw on imagining Black feminist abolitionist futures, so definitely RSVP to that. And if you want more information about our upcoming tours with Inside, Outside, Inside, we're going to put a link in the chat to our newsletter. So please go ahead and sign up and we'll let you know about August tour, which is coming up because somehow time keeps marching onwards. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. And I hope you have a good week. And we'll see you soon, y'all.